Buoy. Hey, I'm Eugene Driscoll from valleyindy.org, and welcome to Navel Gazing, the Valley Indy podcast. Today, my guest is Zach Galligan, the star of Gremlins 1 and Gremlins 2. Galligan is appearing August 27th at CT Horror Fest, a genre convention at the Matrix Conference Center in Danbury, Connecticut. That convention, by the way, is organized by a bunch of people from the Valley, Seymour and Derby specifically. In the interview, Galligan names which horror character he'd most like to get drunk with, why he hated working with Bill Murray back in the day, and what's up with this 1980s renaissance happening with shows such as Stranger Things on Netflix. For more info on the CT Horror Fest, go to cthorror.com. First question I wanted to ask you is going to be weird. I'll just say that in advance, but it's something we like to ask horror actors and fans. Which horror movie character would you most like to get drunk with, and why?
That is a very funny question. I think the answer is fairly obvious, although now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it's a tie.
Okay.
I'd probably like to get drunk with R.J. McCready from The Thing.
Right. Why him? Why R.J.?
Oh, because I think you'd have kind of a fun, cynical, back-and-forth conversation about everything from helicopters to women to dogs to, I don't know, it would just be sort of like a fun, bourbon-drinking, manly man kind of a Scotch conversation, and it would be great.
Nice. And then you said it's a tie, so who's the other one there?
Oh, probably Father Karras from The Exorcist. The scene in The Exorcist, which I just watched about a week ago, when he's at the bar with the other priest and Ramblin' Man by the Allman Brothers is playing in the background, and he says he lost his safe.
Oh, that's right.
I think it would be, as long as he wasn't complaining about his mom too much, I'd probably enjoy him because he seemed like a cool guy with being a boxer and kind of I don't know. If I'm going to go and have a beer with someone, it would be nice if they're like a screen tough guy.
There you go. Zach, you were a very dark man, just based on those two picks. I'll just editorialize there. And then just if you'll indulge me for another moment, what horror movie character would you least like to have a drink with? Hello?
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Okay. Sorry. Thought I lost you.
These are not these are not normal questions that you get. The normal questions you get are like, what was it like to work with Phoebe Cates?
I've got those too. Maybe I should have thrown this out here, then asked you all the basic ones, and then went back to it. But we've had answers like at least my answer is always any Sherry Moon zombie character from any of those Rob Zombie flicks. That's mine.
That's funny. I would probably say I probably wouldn't want to get a drink with the Donald Pleasance character from Halloween.
Right, that man's not a good psychologist or psychiatrist, is he?
Well, the thing about Donald Pleasance is, despite his last name, he doesn't seem like a particularly pleasant person. Maybe he was, but he tends to play, characters that are not, that are pretty intense.
Nice. Okay. Well, hey, I appreciate you indulging me in doing those wacky questions. A little icebreaker. Why not?
Yeah.
So you're appearing August 27th. It's not like me and Zach go back a long ways, or he's just calling to chat because he likes me. He's appearing August 27th at the CT Horror Fest in Danbury, Connecticut. And for more info on that, go to facebook.com/CT Horror Fest. I've been to the others. It's a good time. It's a good growing show. And if you go there, you can meet Zach. I mean, what else do you want? Let's talk about Gremlins.
Well, you might want to meet George Romero, who's also going to be there.
Who? No way. I'm going there for you. I've seen Romero. I'm kidding. No, Romero. That's a good one. I mean, this is going to be the one that I think puts CT Horror Fest, on the map. When you get the lineup is good, and Romero.
Yeah, lineup's good.
Romero's the headliner, I guess.
For sure.
But let's talk about Gremlins. Enough about George Romero. Do you listen to Gilbert Gottfried's podcast by any chance?
I don't, but I've certainly I'm certainly familiar with him. I've actually met Gilbert back in the day many times.
Yeah, it's sort of his podcast is sort of circling your early work in a lot of ways, because just recently, within like the last 3 months, he had Dick Miller on and he had Joe Dante on, and he had a pretty extensive conversation with Joe Dante about Gremlins. And Dante was great. I mean, I don't know what he was like to work with, but he was really funny in the podcast, very candid, and he detailed how tough it was to make Gremlins because the crew was essentially inventing the technology for those little monsters as filming progressed. And he essentially says that the experience burned him out, which is why he didn't immediately jump to make Gremlins 2. And I'm just wondering, how old were you? What were you, like 19 when you guys made Gremlins, the first one?
Yeah, I was 19. And the experience didn't burn me out because of the way that the movie was shot. Well, first of all, when you're 19, it takes a lot to burn you out because you have relentless energy and you're excited about everything, in life. You're still in college and you're like, wow, this whole thing is terrific. Look at that. It's blue sky. I mean, you're just like super optimistic most of the time. And so we shot for 4 months, but we shot the gremlin human interaction scenes and the stuff with Gizmo. And then once we were done on August 4th, I believe, 1983, starting the next day, Joe Dante and everybody started doing effects-only shots. And they did that for an additional 4 months. So whereas I only had a 4-month shoot, Joe Dante had an 8-month shoot. But an 8-month shoot is because at the end of the 4 months, I was tired and definitely ready for a break. But the idea that I was only halfway through is pretty shocking. And of course, when you're the actor, all you have to do is show up and say the lines, listen to the director, and go home. When you're the director, you're the captain of the ship, and you're dealing with budgetary costs and time things and what needs to be cut, what doesn't, and effects that work and don't work. And, a lot of them did not work because, like Joe Dante said, it was very cutting edge at the time. They're inventing stuff on the fly. So, yeah, I found out a lot about the stress level on this movie when we did the 30th anniversary podcast for Empire Magazine. Chris Wayless was there, and he told the podcast, and this is the first I'd heard of it 30 years later, that he basically had a nervous breakdown on Gremlin at the end of Gremlins 2.
Yeah, so now, I would assume, and you're correcting my assumption. I mean, if I was a young person, 19, and here I am in this. This was a major studio picture. This Steven Spielberg was attached to it, and they had all the wiring up your sleeves, and you're essentially acting with toys, for lack of a better word. But you weren't thrown by that in any way. You weren't. I would think that nerves would consume you, but that wasn't the case. And how did Joe Dante help you in any way?
Well, I would correct you in a small way by saying that the nerves in the beginning definitely got to me. I mean, when I got there to Los Angeles to shoot it, I'd never been west of the Mississippi. So, and I couldn't drive because I was a New York City kid. So now I'm in Westwood, Los Angeles, 1983. L.A. still looks like the Beach Boys. You know what I mean? It's right. Like everything was, you walk outside, everybody's dressed like Flashdance because that was the rage at the time. And literally every single girl under 19 has the torn T-shirt on one shoulder.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Everybody's listening to really new wavy music like I Stop the World and Melt With You and Flock of Seagulls and the English Beat. That's what Duran Duran. That's what everybody was listening to. It's funny because I can associate all the music from that period of making the movies so strongly associated with it because it was, we listened to the same radio station in the van that took me to the set every day. Again, as I told you, I got driven to the set every day because I couldn't drive. By the time we did Gremlins 2, I was living in L.A. and had my driver's license, drove myself to the set every day.
And so yeah, go ahead. And you were saying nerves in that very beginning.
Nerves. So in the beginning, I can remember very clearly, I would wake up, my alarm was set to go off at 7 a.m. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. in my bed, paralyzed with fear. I would have this feeling like, I can't do this. There's no way I can do this. There's no way I'm going to be any good. I'm going to be terrible today. I can't do this. I didn't even know if I remember the lines. And then I would start doing the lines over and over again in my head to make sure I had them. And then I would force myself to get out of bed. And when I got in the shower and the water hit me, I thought, okay, you know what? Maybe I can possibly do this. Possibly I can do this. Yeah. And then by the time I got into the car, I was feeling like, okay, I think I have the lines down. Yeah, I think I can do this. I think I'm okay. And by the time I got in the makeup chair, I was convincing myself, you know what? I got this, bad boy. I got this. And I did that every morning for probably the first 2 to 3 weeks until finally someone came to me and said, we were looking at the footage and you and Phoebe look great. Everything looks great. We're excited. And, you guys are fine. And I got that pat on the shoulder. And then once I got the pat on the shoulder, I thought, okay, I'm not going to be fired and this isn't going to be a disgrace. And I'm not, it's not going to be something catastrophic and embarrassing. But yeah, I was deep. Why on earth would I be secure? I'd only done one or two things before. I had no track record and no reason to have any confidence. So guess what? I didn't.
But you just powered through it. You didn't go for you didn't confide in anybody, any of the other cast members or the director or anything like that?
Oh no, I didn't confide in any of the other cast members because my feeling was that they wouldn't understand because they all had more experience than I did. And Phoebe was in Fast Times. The movie came out, was a hit. She and I would go out to a restaurant and everyone was all over her. Nobody knew who I was.
Right.
So she was the star. So she was calm, cool, and collected. She already had a hit under her belt. So what is she nervous about? So what's she going to say if I go, I'm really nervous and scared? What's she going to say? Except either, oh, you'll be fine, which doesn't mean anything, or, yeah, well, it's tough, which will freak me out. So the last thing I wanted her to do was go, well, yeah, you're kind of just doing okay. So I'd step it up a notch. I was terrified that she would say something like that after just working with Sean Penn. For God's sake.
That's right. So the whole world's in that movie.
Yeah. So I didn't say anything to anyone. And what am I going to do? Call my mom? My mom doesn't know anything about acting or show business. So all she would say, you'll be fine, dear, which I knew at the time, of course, meant nothing. So no, it was all just private internal terror until basically I kind of figured out one day that I'd shot so much on the movie that it was almost impossible for them to fire me because it would simply just cost too much.
There you go. You had that on your side.
Yeah, I was basically like, hey, guess what? I just realized I'm a month in. I don't think there's any conceivable way that after burning through $3 million that they could fire me and start again from scratch.
And Gremlins, I was in 1984, I was 10 years old. I probably saw it when it came out on VHS. I didn't go see it in the theater. But I remember distinctly the controversy. I was sort of a movie junkie even as a kid. Between Gremlins was a subversive little film, and I remember watching it, and you're expecting Steven Spielberg sort of nostalgia, and it has that Steven Spielberg touch, but then it's a dark movie, and it and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom are responsible for the PG-13 rating that we have today. I was watching some interviews with you at, I think, various Q&As. Were you surprised what you saw on the screen? Was that what you were expecting when you made the movie?
No, when I saw the first cut of Gremlins, and I've told this story a bunch of times, but I saw it with Phoebe in a small screening room, and Joe Dante and the producer Mike Fennell were sitting about 4 or 5 rows behind us, probably watching us, since they were fully aware of what the movie looked like, and gauging our reaction. When it was over, Joe and Mike it was kind of amazing because they were kind of nervous, and they were like, so what'd you think? It was amazing to think that they were nervous about our reaction. Because we're both 19. I guess I'm just a little arrogant now, but my feeling is well, what would I care if the 2 19-year-olds in the movie didn't like it? You know what I mean? But anyway, they actually were sweet and kind of cared. And I remember I said something like, can I just talk to Phoebe alone for a second? And they were like, sure. So that was a weird request. And we went outside, and I said, did you like that? Was it any good? That's like the weirdest movie I've ever seen. It's like a cartoon or something. I expected it to be like Aliens. I expected it to be, which hadn't been made, but that tone. I expected it to be like, or War Games. I expected it to have like an action-y feel to it.
Yes.
With some suspense. And like the bar scene was just a giant Looney Tunes cartoon gone insane. And the tone completely threw me because it didn't feel like what I was making. Didn't feel like my internal experience really at all. And I go, is it any good? And she was like, I don't know. She's like, I think it might not be that good. I don't know. So I said, well, what do we do? And she's like, well, let's just go back and say that we loved it. What else are we going to do? So we went back and we were like, yeah, no, it's cool. It's amazing. It's interesting. It's this and that. And I think we were both nervous for about a day. And then the next day we went to the premiere at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. And it was one of the most riotous, raucous, people screaming and throwing stuff at the screen premieres you've ever seen in your life. And by the time we got to the gremlin blowing up in the microwave, the reaction in the theater was so loud and deafening that you couldn't hear the ding on the microwave. I never heard that joke until about the second or third time I saw it.
It's very much a Joe Dante film. I mean, it sort of was, I think when it came out, at least from my memory, Spielberg was as popular and as influential as he is now. That's when he was, his career was sort of still rising. It was sort of marketed, from what I remember, as almost a Steven Spielberg film, but it seems like it's very much true to Joe Dante's sort of wackiness. Is that correct?
Well, I think one of the reasons why people got upset about it is, if you're really brutally honest, it's a subversive Joe Dante movie, 100%, marketed by Warner Brothers as a cute and cuddly E.T. version number 2, right down to the poster of my hands holding the box.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Young kid, young boy with a pet. But you can tell by my pants and my hands that I'm older than like Henry Thomas and E.T. So it's like teenager with adorable pet. Come on down. It's like E.T. grown up. Fun for the whole family. So everybody raced down, and for 54 minutes they got exactly what they thought. And just as they relaxed, Joe Dante kicks you in the stomach for the next hour.
Yeah, and Dante said that, and this was, again, on that Gilbert Gottfried podcast. I get all my news and information from Gilbert Gottfried's podcast. He said that no one believed in Gremlins. I guess he meant the studio. This was prior to its release. He said that people just didn't get it. Did you sense any of that during filming?
It's so funny. I'm just so blissfully positive and unaware. And when we did the 30th anniversary podcast, I was like, I guess I'm the only jerk who thought it was going to be a hit from the beginning. I said, but I'd like to go on the record and say I was correct.
There you go. And Dante said that he prefers the sequel, which I think would be maybe surprising to conventional wisdom. But him and Gilbert Gottfried said that they prefer the sequel. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't really surprise me that much because my guess is, and what's so interesting is I don't really know that much about the genesis of Gremlins 2, like how Joe Dante got with Charlie Haas and everything like that. But my guess is that Dante had complete control over Gremlins 2. So, therefore, Gremlins 2 is much, much more his sensibility and his vision than Gremlins 1 was. So I can't imagine why he wouldn't like a more complete version of his vision than an incomplete version.
But you said you personally prefer that first one.
I like the darker tone, and I like it to be. I think the thing that's great about Gremlins is I still think it's one of the greatest examples of tone shifting in a movie. The way it goes from scary to funny, back to scary to funny so effortlessly. People have tried that so many times. It's very, very difficult to do. You can kind of count on one hand the kind of movies that are successful in doing that. I think American Werewolf in London is successful doing that. I think this New Zealand movie Housebound recently was successful in doing that. you can argue that parts of Krampus are successful in doing that. It's a very tough balance to be kind of mean and vicious and then turn around and go, we're just kidding. And the perfect example of that in Gremlins is the very disturbing scene of like the Christmas tree, the gremlin in the Christmas tree, but it seems like a Christmas tree attacking my mother.
Right.
And like almost kind of oddly like choking her and almost borderline sexually assaulting her. Because like the Christmas tree's like between her legs. It's like very strange and dark. And you're watching this going, what the hell? In a PG movie? It's like crazy.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I come in, I cut the head off, and you watch the head burning and you sort of have that moment of relief. And then you look and you see the gremlin blow his nose on the curtains. And that's like ridiculous. And it makes you kind of forget and laugh at all the horrific stuff that just happened in a really, really clever way. Very, very difficult to do that in terms of tone. I think it's very easy to make a slapstick comedy like Gremlins 2, like kind of like Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's an easier thing to do than what Joe did in the first one. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. That first Gremlins it's a unique movie, and it's inspired a whole slew of ripoffs, like sort of low budget ones. Let's talk about this '80s renaissance that very much seems to be happening, particularly in sort of horror movies and the like, the sort of genre picks. You can really notice it in horror. There was Ty West's House of the Devil a few years back. I think it took place in the '80s. More recently, there was this insane telekinetic movie called The Mind's Eye, released like a week ago, very much like Scanners. And, of course, Stranger Things, I'm sorry, on Netflix, which is just... I
haven't seen it yet, unfortunately, but I'll probably watch an episode.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, just, don't take my word for it, but it's just like hugely entertaining. And it seems to go, it's not, some of these things almost seem like remakes or they're nostalgia, but Stranger Things really seems to sort of capture the soul of the 80s. I strongly recommend it. But do you have any idea? Have you thought about? I mean, you're one of the most iconic movies of the '80s, Gremlins. What's going on in film or in our culture? Is it just nostalgia? Does this happen all the time? Or are the '80s now the new '50s? Are we looking back fondly as the '80s as this innocent time, given everything that's happening in the U.S. and the world? What's happening?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think the '80s have a certain sweetness to them and a certain lack of viciousness to them that people really yearn for. And I think people get a little tired of cynical culture, that for and I haven't seen it, so I'm not criticizing it, but like, for example, I hear that Suicide Squad is kind of like what they call edgy. And I think that's great. And there are movies there that are edgy and that are fun, but I think that there's sort of like a certain type of kid that is over edgy and we never really liked it in the first place and prefers to be kinder and gentler, to use the 80s George Bush term, first George Bush, the kinder, gentler, sweeter, more innocent thing, and if you look at some of the trends and some of the stuff that's just so ubiquitous, like bad news and terrorism and ISIS and the availability of porn and the weird things that are happening to young kids and the depression and everything, the complexity and the internet and the social media, it's probably super overwhelming. And then they see something like the 80s and they go, wow, that seems so nice and fun and simple. And I think there's a real desire and a yearning to return to what seemed to be simpler times. I mean, I really don't know if they were simpler at the time because you didn't have terrorism, but you had the Cold War, and that was scary. Russia would blow you up.
Right, any second.
So it may just be, hindsight may just be 2020 and freedom.
And what about? I'm going to ask you questions that you always get asked. Just Gremlins 3. There's been tons of talk of a reboot of some kind. Have you heard anything lately about that film?
Well, you can kind of guess according to the IMDb page And if you look at the Gremlins 3 IMDb page, you can almost tell. In fact, you can tell this about almost any movie. If you look at the IMDb page and you watch its progress, you can see that first they posted it and they just had Chris Columbus and Steven Spielberg. And then the next change was they hired a writer. And that's where it's stayed. And so if you know anything about the making of studio movies, you know what's happening is the writer is writing stuff, and the studio and Chris Columbus and Spielberg, or any combination of those three, are either liking what they're getting or not liking what they're getting, or sending the writer back for rewrites and
Right.
Screenwriters, most people won't believe this, but screenwriters sometimes rewrite a script 10, 15, 20 times.
Mm.
There's an expression in Hollywood, writing is rewriting. That's basically all it is. It's not just the notion you write a screenplay and do like 1 or 2 drafts and hand it in. I suppose that happens. I think it's exceedingly rare. Also, what happens is a person can write a draft and they can polish it a couple of times, and then everyone can sit down and look at it and go, yeah, it's not exciting or good enough. The whole thing I don't like, and you can scrap the entire thing and start from the beginning. So the answer to your question is, I think they're very serious about Gremlins 3. I think they're probably going to do it, but I think they want to get it right. And I bet if you'd followed Jurassic World, I bet they took a long time getting that script right. And then once you have the script in place, if you're a good filmmaker, like Chris Columbus and Steven Spielberg are both excellent filmmakers, they know that once you have the script, which is essentially the blueprint, it's pretty hard to screw it up.
Yeah.
So my guess is that they're writing it, and when they have something they're happy with, I think it will start to move into production with tremendous speed, because I think Warner Brothers wants and needs this, because it's another installment in a successful franchise that has huge recognizability around the world, and that's exactly what studios want to make now.
And the other thing, I was asked on Twitter by one of your fans, can you tell us or give any details about the Waxwork versions coming out on Blu-ray, I guess, in October?
Yeah, I can. I can give you massive details. October 18th is the street date. Tony Hickox and I, just last week, we did 2, I think, pretty hilarious commentaries about about Waxwork 1 and 2. That I think were very honest in it. I think Tony discusses what he liked and didn't like, and what he had money to shoot and what he didn't have money to shoot, and parts of the movie that he can't watch because of the limited budget, and so he's very open and candid about his likes and his dislikes of the movie.
Oh, those are the best. Those are the best commentaries. Those are the best.
Yeah, I mean, we're not just sitting there kissing the movie's ass. I mean, we say we say what we like, but we also say what we don't like, about our own work. And I kind of talk about things from an actor's perspective, and he talks about things from a visual perspective. And we've been great friends for 30 years, so it's kind of like, even though we're both sober, it's kind of like getting drunk with us for 2 hours and watching the commentary.
That sounds awesome. So that's coming out in October. And then one last thing I wanted to ask you about, and you've probably been asked a million times too, but it's just fascinating to me. Tom Schiller's Nothing Lasts Forever it's probably the most famous quote unquote lost movies there is. And you filmed that right before Gremlins or at the same time?
Correct.
Okay.
Before.
So, what was it? I mean, I've seen just bits and parts of that movie, on YouTube. I think it was briefly on YouTube. It's been aired a bunch of times. But how did filming that compare to Gremlins? How did you? I mean, that had to be sort of a 180, I would guess.
Well, I mean, in many ways, that was an even more mind-blowing experience than Gremlins, because I'm a high school senior. I'm doing this MGM movie, the lead in an MGM movie with Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, as my senior project. I'm in New York. I have no idea what I'm doing, or very, very limited idea. I knew how to act on stage, but how to transfer it to film acting, I was pretty lost. And the director had, I think, a pretty tough time with me the first week, trying to convert me. into a film actor, and he didn't really. Tom really didn't have the language that he needed as a director, as an acting director, to kind of tell me. So in many ways, he had to just simply show me. So what we would do is he'd be like, "You can't do it like this. You have to do it like this." And then I would go and try, and he would go, "No, that's not it." And we'd do it again, and finally I would get it, and I would have to, at 18, have to figure out and translate what he was kind of requiring of me. And then finally he said to me something that really sent the light bulb off. I go, "What about this?" He goes, "No." He goes, "That's wrong." He goes, "You're just making faces." He goes, "How about this?" He goes, "Instead of smiling, in your mind, think of a smile." I said, "What?" He goes, "Just think of someone smiling." So I did. And he pointed to me, he goes, "That's it." He goes, "If you think it, then we see it. Just like a real person who's thinking. So all you have to do when you want to communicate something is think it. Don't do anything with your face." And I went, "Oh, right. Okay." And then I think for the rest of the film, my performance really smoothed out and got a lot better. I can still see the parts where I'm a little clunky in the beginning that obviously we probably maybe should have reshot, but we didn't have the money or the time, as almost nobody ever does. So, but it's pretty seamless. I mean, you'd have to be I think you have to be very, very skilled in on-camera technique, in order to get it. I think like Michael Caine could probably be like, "Oh yeah, there you're doing this." And I'd be like, "Yep." And he's like, but most audiences probably wouldn't pick up on that.
And for anybody that doesn't know, this was Tom Schiller was sort of born out of the SNL shorts from the original Saturday Night Live in the late 70s, and he made this film, and it was basically, I guess the studio, and I'm not 100% familiar with the backstory, decided it was unreleasable, and it became this sought-after movie. It's got to be, and of course it had, like you said, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Imogene Coca, even Lawrence Tierney is listed on IMDb as being in this. So you're a kid at that point. Bill Murray, what was that like?
Well, this story with me and Bill Murray is told multiple times in just about every interview, but it's still pretty kind of amazing that it happened. Bill at the time was sort of going through a little bit of a methody thing. Where what he thought was, he goes, he thought to himself, we played enemies in the movie. Mm-hmm. And he didn't want to like pal around with me on the set. And then he was afraid that if he palled around with me on the set, that a lot of the tension between us would be lost because I was inexperienced. So what he thought, actually rather correctly, was that if he antagonized me about 80% of the time, that I would dislike him intensely. So, but at the same time, he didn't want me to dislike him intensely because at the end he wanted to say, "Hey man, it was great working with you and I hope everything's okay." And, I was just kind of like playing along and whatnot. He didn't really want me to loathe him. So he would come to the set and he would be occasionally nice to me, but most of the time he was a dick. And it was actually incredibly heartbreaking because he was one of my idols. And I was like, "Oh my God, Stripes. Oh my God, Meatballs. Oh my God, this and that." And he would do things. My mom would visit the set. He'd antagonize my mom. My sister would visit the set. He'd antagonize my sister. And it was amazing. And it worked because I hated him by the end of the movie. And then, of course, what's so funny is I went to Columbia, and about a year later, they were shooting Ghostbusters on the Columbia campus.
Okay.
Now nobody knew what this was. They just saw a bunch of cameras and this hearse with this weird logo on the side, and them wearing these ridiculous suits. Nobody knew what Ghostbusters was. The movie hadn't come out yet. But I knew them. I just worked with them about 8 months ago. So I went up to the barricades and I waved to them, and Aykroyd, who is, arguably the nicest human being in show business, just like this total sweetheart, sees me, and I don't know how he saw me with all the kids and people watching, but I was waving. I guess I was the only person really aggressively waving, and the other kids were just staring with their mouth open. So I was waving, and I got his attention, and he taps Murray, and Murray looks, and I can see Murray looking at me squinting, and then I can hear Murray, and he goes, "It's the kid." and Aykroyd waves me over. So I go under the blue police sawhorse, and as I do, the security stops me, because you're not going to let people go under the thing, right? And Murray walks over and goes, "Officer, no, it's okay. He's with us." And I was like, oh my God, one of the great moments of my life. So I walked over to them, and they showed me the car, and we started talking, and Dan Aykroyd was like, because Dan is so nice that he's like, "Call me Danny." So I've actually never called him, in my life, never called him Dan. I've always just called him Danny, because that's what he asked me to call him. So I was like, "How are you?" And he's like, "Hey, man, I was working with Spielberg," because, of course, he worked with him on Twilight Zone, the movie, in 1941.
All about the same time of that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I was like, "Oh, he was great. He wasn't really there much. He was shooting Temple of Doom." And Murray is a completely different person, being nice and friendly and being jokes and grabbing my head and giving me noogies and everything like that. And I was like, that is so weird. This guy is so weird. And then I realized later, I read some article with him where he talked about, why he did what he did with me. And as an actor, now as an adult, it makes complete sense. But at the time, it was totally traumatizing.
And is it satisfying? I mean, it's got to be satisfying now to see that there's an awareness now about Nothing Lasts Forever. It was sort of a hidden movie for a very long time.
It's one of the strangest, first of all, it's one of the strangest movies I've ever done. It's still, even today, I still think it's a bizarre movie as much as I love it, and I do love it. I think it's really brilliant, and I think Tom Schiller is a deeply brilliant guy who has a brain unlike most other artists. He just sees things with that incredibly unique perspective. But the fact now that it's like getting viewed, in many ways, it's even better that it sat on the shelf for as long as it did, because now it's this unbelievable treat. I think it was ahead of its time, and now people are ready for it, and they're sophisticated, and they get it. And I think to quote the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson, I think that movie just wasn't made for those times. It really wasn't. It was made for now. And I'm super thrilled because I'm going to the United Kingdom in the first week of December this year, and I'm bringing over a copy of it, and I'm going to show it to the British audiences who are dying to see it for the very first time, and they're going to lose their minds.
Oh, that's wonderful. Awesome. Well, Zach, you know what? I took up enough of your time. I want to thank you again for taking the time to chat with me. And if anybody wants to see Zach, he's going to be at the CT Horror Fest. That's coming up Saturday, August 27th in Danbury, Connecticut. You can follow him on Twitter at ZWGman. And again, the CT Horror Fest on Facebook, facebook.com/CT Horror Fest. Zach, thanks so much. Go ahead.
It's the same ZWG man, which, by the way, people are like, what does that mean? It's my initials, Zachary Wolf Galligan, ZWG, and then the word man, because I'm a man. And so it's ZWG man. It's that on Twitter, and it's also that on Instagram as well.
Nice. Yeah, and you got a good Twitter feed. There's always good stuff on there. So that's always good.
Hey, man, I'm up to 18,000, almost 200 people.
Yeah. All right. Good. So when this publishes, retweet this because we're nonprofit, Zach. We need all the help we can get, for God's sakes.
All right, buddy.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
He hates bright lights. There's some things I forgot to tell you guys, and they're really important. Number one, he hates bright lights. We know that. But you got to keep him out of the sunlight. Sunlight will kill him. Number two, keep him away from water. Don't give him any water to drink. And whatever you do, don't give him a bath. And probably the most important thing, don't ever feed him after midnight.